moment, I thought that plane might have gone down because of the order I had given. It took a while for us to get the information on Flight 93, but eventually we learned about the heroics of the passengers on that airplane. It became apparent we were facing a new kind of enemy. This is what war was like in the 21st century. You really don't know what it's like to be a wartime president until the moment occurs. I never campaigned on, please elect me, I'll be the kind of wartime chief you'll be proud of. The war came upon us unexpectedly. And at that point in time, you just deal with the issues. And there's a certain gravity, of course, that comes when you start making decisions that involve life. This wasn't one of these moments where you kind of weigh the consequences or think about the politics. You decide. And I made the decisions as best I could in the fog of war. But I was determined to protect the country, and I was determined to find out who did it and go get them.
Okay, I'll just show Air Force One westbound. He's radar contact 2577.
Yeah, don't question about where he's going. And just watch him, and there's no flight plan in right now. We're not going to put anything in.
Copy that.
Thank you.
Air.
I was frustrated I wasn't at the command center in Washington. I was frustrated that I was flying around the country. I was frustrated we'd been attacked, and I was frustrated the communication system wasn't working any good. But in a moment of crisis like this, it's important not to be frustrated. It's important to be focused on the task at hand, which was to gather information and make decisions, in this case, on how to protect the country and respond to the attacks.
Then the president was actually moved. We don't know where the president is. He was out of Washington at the time of these terror attacks. He was in Florida, and then he was moved. We heard or were told.
One of my concerns, like the concerns of other husbands and our wives, was my spouse okay? Was Laura okay? And my second concern was, were our girls okay? It took a while to find her. She was in a secure location, and it was awesome to hear her comforting voice. And she had talked to the girls, and they were secure, so that was a relief for me. As I flew around, it dawned on me that we were the only plane left. I looked out the window, and we had armed escorts. But you don't want the president flying back into an environment that is dangerous, and something were to happen to me. It would have been a major blow for the terrorists, because they would have killed the president of the United States in a time of war. And so I said, all right, reluctantly said, all right, and we headed to Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana.
You got anything on 151?
No, you can have whatever you need, brother, because we don't have anybody in the air over here.
We landed at Barksdale, and it was surreal because Barksdale was in the midst of an exercise that utilized armed bombers. And so we landed on this base full of armed bombers that were being heavily guarded by, armed troops. And it was like flying in the midst of a combat zone itself. And we got in a vehicle, and the kid driving the thing felt like 100 miles an hour. I mean, we're bouncing along, charging along. Finally I told the guy, I said, "Son, slow down. I mean, Al-Qaeda's not here." That's about as humorous a moment as the day had. The American people are getting inundated with pictures of collapsing buildings and smoldering Pentagon. People jumping to their death. There's just unspeakable horror on their TV screens, and they needed to know that the president was, one, safe, and two, along with the government, on top of the situation.
All major branches of the United States government evacuated this morning. The Pentagon has been evacuated along with the West Wing of the White House, the Capitol, all major...
And the scene here is just one right out of one of those movies you would see in Hollywood. People walking around with tears, holding their heads, looking up at what's left of the World Trade Center, just shaking their heads in disbelief. The scene just of utter chaos and just wondering what happened to those folks in the Trade Center.
From President Bush shortly. We told you he's not returning to Washington.
He is not in Washington. He is currently in Louisiana, and will have something to say tonight.
I made my statement. They refueled the airplane. We trimmed down the traveling party on Air Force One, and we're headed to Offutt Air Force Base. Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. The full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test.
That is President Bush. Now that, by the way, just to point out what is going on, was actually taped earlier. The president made that statement. It was videotaped. We just heard it. And then the president was actually moved. He apparently is being obviously well protected.
The decision was made to go to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska by the military and the Secret Service because they figured this was the safest place for me to be. Very secure bunker there. There's a lot of communications there. When we landed it in Nebraska, we got hustled off to the secure bunkers. But I had a conference room in it, and I had assembled my national security team via the video conferencing tools at Offutt. And I got a report for how each department was responding to the crises. My question was who did it. The head of the CIA, George Tenet, believed it was Al-Qaeda. It had the earmarks of an Al-Qaeda attack. But Tenet wasn't that definitive yet. So my first indication it could be Al-Qaeda was during the national security meeting at Offutt Air Force Base. It's during this moment that I made the decision I'm going back to Washington over the objections of just about everybody else. I'd had it. I'd said I need to get home. A lot had developed. It was important to wrap the day up with the presidential speech assuring people that the government was functioning and responding and that we would take the appropriate actions necessary to protect our country. And I damn sure wasn't going to give it from a bunker in Nebraska. I wanted to give it from the Oval Office. I didn't want the enemy to have the psychological victory of a president speaking from a bunker in the heartland of our country and not speaking from the Capitol that had been attacked. So I told the head of the Secret Service and others, I'm coming home. And they prepared the flight, and off we went.
Washington Air Force One, would like lower, please. Air Force One departing 15 for 7,000.
Air Force One, turn left at the end, contact ground point 8.
Force One copies. We are cleared to land. There will be possibly one or two fighter-type aircraft landing on the east runway just after our arrival.
Air Force One, request approved.
President Bush arrived back in Washington a few moments ago to essentially a silent city. Washington, D.C., much like the lower part of Manhattan, has been...
As we lifted off out of Andrews Air Force Base on Marine One, I could see the smoke of the Pentagon. And I remember thinking, here I am, the commander-in-chief in a war zone. We'd been attacked by an enemy right here in the heart of our capital. The Marine One pilot took evasive action, flying this thing as if we are in a war zone. And we came pretty close to the Pentagon. It was an eerie sight to look down. The contrast was unbelievable between a vibrant city and a city that had been shut down because of an attack.
President Bush is back at the White House. He went directly to the Oval Office. We're now told we'll be speaking about an hour from now at 8:30. Live continuing coverage on 10.
There was a debate in Washington about whether or not we should declare war. And I made the decision not to declare war that night. I did make it clear that we were going to protect the homeland. We're going to bring justice. I headed back to the White House, to the PIOC. Vice President was there, and a couple of other senior staffers were there. And saw Laura. I gave the big hug, and you know, we didn't need to say a lot. The hug is all that was necessary.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed.
You know, I felt I needed to strike the right balance between comforting and grieving and going on the offense.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
So the Oval Office speech was as close to a declaration of war as we could get without declaring war.
This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time.
I'd had a long day. I knew I needed rest, and I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about the images, thinking about what I needed to do, thinking about the day, thinking about the next day. And I heard a guy breathing heavily. And it's Mr. President. Mr. President, you gotta come now. The White House is under attack. I grabbed Laura. I grabbed Barney, the Scottish Terrier.